Hello, my friend. I want to talk to you about existential courage. I'm going to do a series. This is about Socrates and Plato. So, the term existential courage is obviously linked to existential philosophies, but as many of you will know, I trace those back to the Athenian philosophers as well, because they really introduced this kind of existential thinking. And they spoke a lot about courage, though not precisely about existential courage. For them, courage on the battlefield was incredibly important, and it figures like that in Socrates' dialogues and in Plato's theories all the time. But you know, Socrates, he embodied that virtue of courage. He was a soldier. He was actually out there in the field, and he was famous for holding his own all the time. And his philosophical mission was to act that same courage against the anxiety of social exclusion and death. So to apply it in everyday life, not just in the military. There is a dialogue called Laches, where Socrates debates some Athenian generals about the nature of courage, which in Greek was called Andrea. And whilst the generals are pretty good at standing their ground in battle, Socrates pushes them into deeper and deeper definitions as he does. And he said that courage is a wise endurance of the soul. Spiritual endurance. The stamina to hold on to truth and self-examination when surrounded by doubt, confusion, hostility, difficulty. It takes intelligence to know what is truly worth fearing, Socrates says. What is truly worth fearing is losing your integrity, my friend, rather than fearing social discomfort or losing your reputation. And of course, in the Apology, Socrates comes right back to this when he is facing the death penalty, and he demonstrates this kind of courage to be in the face of the ultimate threat of non-being, of being put to death by his country, by his state, by his city. He famously declares that the unexamined life is not worth living, and that is his form of courage. And he argues that to fear death is a sign of false wisdom, because you pretend to know what you do not know. And how do we know that death is to be feared? He makes a good argument to show that it isn't. Of course, Plato speaks about Socrates as the living example of an integrated courage into a grander philosophical and metaphysical and psychological framework. And especially in the Republic, he speaks about the human soul in 3 parts and defines courage as the virtue that comes with the spirited part of the soul, as opposed to the rational part or the desiring part of the soul. So in the allegory of the cave, Plato speaks completely about courage, because the philosopher who breaks free from his chains in the cave has to stand up against what is normally done and the rules of the cave, and he has to dare to go out of the cave and find the blinding light of the sun, which is symbolic of truth. So leaving your comfort zone, leaving behind collective delusions, that is where true existential courage is found, and returning to the cave to help others, even when you know that they might ridicule you or even want to put you to death for challenging their reality, is the ultimate act of existential courage. And that is as much as I'm going to say about Socrates and Plato's views on existential courage. As you see, it's really about becoming authentic and therefore putting your confidence in your authentic pursuit of truth. That is what existential courage is for Socrates and Plato.